Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum. I welcome you all to the 5th lecture on the course Management, Organizational Policies and Practices. Before we start with the contents of the lecture itself, I would like to give you a recap on our lecture 4, which was on the internal assessment. We started off with the resource-based view of the firm, which states that why it is important to analyze the strengths and weaknesses of the firm, or to make an internal audit of all the different departments in the organization, and what are the benefits that an internal audit can give a firm. So the view basically says that it is for achieving and for sustaining comparative advantage, an organization needs to carry an internal assessment and to identify what are the core or capabilities of the organization, on the basis of which it is going to compete in the line of business or in the industry. Then we read the concept of threshold resources and competencies. Threshold resources are the minimum resources, and threshold competencies are the minimum requirements of the activities and the processes that a firm needs to deploy its resources with to get the competitive, to stay in the line of business. Then we read the concept of core resources and competencies. So the unique resources are the resources which are not easily available to the other competitors, which are really rare, and the core competencies are those activities and processes which a firm deploys its resources in a way that are non-imitable by the competitors. So we saw that the strategic capability becomes robust when it has the qualities of rarity. It is not easily imitable by the competitors. It is non-substitutable by the competitors because it is causally ambiguous, and it has linkage ambiguity. So all these factors, when they are present, then they make your strategic capabilities robust. And robustness of strategic capability is required to sustain the competitive advantage of a firm. If its strategic capability is not robust, what will happen is that its strategic capability will become redundant, and they will transform into the rigidities of the company, the core rigidities of the company. The firm will fall into the strategic drift. So firm, one, it has the implications of the managers that firms they need to identify what are their core capabilities, what are their core competencies, what are their unique resources. It needs to identify them, and then it needs to constantly upgrade them. Secondly, the unique resources and core competencies must complement each other. They must be used in complementarity with each other. If a firm has some core competencies but it does not have enough resources through which those competencies can be deployed, then it's useless to have those competencies, and vice versa. We also saw the concept of value chain. Why is it important to create value? How you can sustain your competitive advantage if your product or service is valued in the eyes of the customer, and how even if you have some core competencies and unique resources, you may not be able to gain competitive advantage if your product or service is not valued by the customer. So on the value, in order to assess the value that is created by the firm at various points, we also saw the concept of value chain analysis. And we saw that how at different levels, how with the help of different primary and support activities, a firm produces a certain output, it gives certain output and it brings it to the market, and how value chain analysis can benefit a firm to understand, to analyze the various costs associated at various levels and the profits associated at various levels, and how it helps to decide a firm what activities it needs to produce itself and what activities it needs to outsource, right? So a firm can make a better judgment of how much investments it needs to make itself on certain resources or competencies, and what it needs to outsource from other firms who have the core competencies in some other resources in which it does not have, and some other activities in which it does not have. Then we saw the concept of we also saw that how different firms can carry the different qualitative and quantitative analysis to understand their internal position, or to make an assessment of their strengths and weaknesses. And there are two ways with which a firm can do this quantitative analysis, which is by way of balanced scorecard and the different financial ratios. Balanced scorecard gives you a balanced picture of all the functions, and it provides you a balanced view of what your position is vis-a-vis your competitors. And the qualitative assessment is, again, you get information from the customers, you get information from the employees on what your standing is, what your strengths are, and what your weaknesses are. For today's lecture, I would be discussing the concept of strategic human resource management. So far, I have given you an introduction on what management is, what are the different management functions, what are the different managerial roles, what are the different skills that are required by managers, what are the characteristics of effective managers, and we have also seen that the mistakes that the managers generally make. And we have seen that how the transition occurs from first managers who take over the first day, and how this transition takes place when some time passes, when 6 months pass, what are the expectations of the managers, when a year passes, what are the expectations of the managers, and what are the conclusions of the managers about what management is. Then we saw what is strategic management, right? And it was important to see what strategic management is, because the policies and the objectives that a firm makes, they should be aligned with the strategy of the organization. Every organization has its strategy, right? So which is, as we discussed, that it is made at the corporate level, at the highest level. So as per the strategy, the firm designs its policies and it designs its objectives. So it is important to understand what is strategy, how to manage strategically, how strategy is developed, right, and what are the implications of the strategy for the managers, right? Then we had an understanding, we discussed that why and how firms make internal and external assessment, and how it helps development of the strategy of the organization, right? So based on that external and internal assessment, based on the vision statement of the company, a firm develops its strategy, and which is the corporate strategy. And after development of that strategy, the goals, the different targets, they're assigned to the different strategic business units of the company, right, or different branches of the company. They are given the targets, and they need to meet those targets. They are assessed or evaluated against those targets, right? So management needs to be strategic, right? And of course, human resource management is one of the very important aspects of management, and it needs to be strategic too. What do we mean by strategic human resource management? We'll be discussing here what is strategic human resource management, what are the implications of this kind of management, and what are the different policies that are involved when it comes to strategic human resource management. What are the different implications of these policies, how the policies differ vis-a-vis the nature of operations of the different organizations, how the policies differ vis-a-vis the different sectors of the organization, how the nature of business, the nature of product line, the nature of technology that a firm is employing, it affects the HR strategy of the company. And if your HR strategy of your company is not in line with the strategy of your organization, with the corporate strategy of your organization, then how you are managing ineffectively, and how it can lead you to the losses. So these are the kind of concepts which we are going to discuss here. So let's see what is exactly the skeleton for today's presentation. what you can expect and what would be the learning outcomes from today's presentation. We'll be starting with an introduction of strategic human resource management. Then we'll be moving to the elements of human resource management. We'll see what are the critical human resource management goals, the strategic tensions that are facing the managers. We'll see the best written best practices views of strategic human resource management, and we'll also see a critics of these two views at the end. So what is strategic human resource management? It is the human resource management. It is the strategic and coherent approach to the management of an organization's most valued assets, the people working there who individually and collectively contribute to the achievement of the objectives of the business. Right? So strategic human resource management is the management of people in a way that the business objectives of an organization can be met through people, through effective utilization of people, right? So strategic human resource management is enabling the people to work in directions, to work in ways that they contribute towards the realization of the organizational corporate strategy. When we're talking about human resource management, whom we are talking about? Are we talking who is managed? Is it the shop floor workers that are managed? It is the lower level managers? Is it the middle level managers? It is the top level managers? What level of management are we talking about when we are talking about managing the human resources of the organization? You need to question yourself. So human resource management is basically covering all workforce groups. So all employees cadres, including the managers themselves, are being managed when we are talking about human resource management. It's not only about the shop floor workers, it's not only about the lower level employees or the non-managerial employees, it's also about the managers. It's only the difference in the way of how they are treated. Like the high level managers, they are treated in a high trust manner, which means that maybe they do not have that much level of strict controls as the lower level employees have. Lower level employees have strict control based systems, right? They have the rewards and the punishments. The higher level managers, they also have those rewards and punishments, but the kind of control mechanisms that we have, the organizations normally have for the lower level employees, they are not there for the higher level managers. The higher level managers, they have more autonomy and they have more discretion to do things, and the lower level employees, they don't have that autonomy or discretion to do things. Their activities, their performance is continuously being monitored and controlled. So all kinds of employment relations, they are coming under human resource management. Whether it is the worker relationship with the management, whether it's the management union relationship, that is also a part of human resource management, right? Then who is involved when we're talking about human resource management or managing human resources? Whom we are talking about? One, we are talking about the human resource managers or the specialist managers, right? Specialist managers, who are the people who are involved in designing the selection processes, who are involved in designing the policies and laws vis-a-vis the human resource management, such as the equal employment opportunity laws, the affirmative action laws, safety and health policy, etc. Then the people who are engaged in developing in doing the training need analysis of the organization for its employees, then who are involved in formulation of performance incentive plans. Then we also have, you must have heard, the compensation managers in some certain organizations. We have the selection managers, the recruitment managers in certain organizations, the training managers in certain organizations. So they are all the specialist managers who are undertaking the specialist human resource management activities, right? But in human resource management, it is not only the generalist human resource managers, or it is not only the specialist human resource managers that are engaged. In human resource management, line managers are also important, and they are also engaged in the human resource activity, because it is the line managers who are responsible to get the organizational policies implemented through the employees. Whatever those policies are, whether they are the policies coming from the marketing department, whether they are the policies coming from the finance department, the accounting department, they are the human resource policies, or the strategic policies of the organization coming from the corporate level, any kinds of policies. It is the first line managers who are the direct implementers of the policies made by the organization. They are directly responsible for implementing those policies. So the line managers of the organization, they must stay in loop. So you must have seen that whenever there are some certain selection processes going on in an organization, or there's some interview process going on in an organization, some interviews are carried out. Of course, the specialist manager is there, but also we have the line supervisor in the interview panel. Similarly, for carrying out the training need analysis, it's not the job done by the training specialist alone, right? It is also with the involvement of the first line supervisor. His feedback is taken on the performance of the employees in certain areas. Performance appraisals are filled by the first line managers, and then they are going to the HR department. So the role of the line manager cannot be ignored. In certain small organizations, you must have seen that we do not have the HR department. The line manager is performing all the duties that are performed by the HR managers or the HR department in larger organizations, right? So the interplay of these two roles is really important, that the line managers are also performing many HR roles, right? And they must stay in the loop. Then we have the management styles. Of course, there can be different styles of management, and it depends upon the nature of contract that an employer has with the employee, right? For example, how you're going to manage your permanent employees is going to be different from how you're going to manage your contractual employees. An example of this could be that maybe you do not spend that much amount of money on the training and development of your contractual employees than as much you spend on the training and development of the permanent employees, because the permanent employees, you can see that the long-term benefits that you can get from the permanent employees are different than the benefits that you get from the contractual employees. Contractual employee is gone once the contract is over, so you won't be making that much investments in that employee, right? And then you have the part-time or full-time employee. Your treatment or your management style would be different from for managing those two types of employees. Then there are, of course, within firm differences, which means that your management styles, your management policies, your human resource policies, they would be different when it comes to the different departments within the same organization. And these policies and procedures and practices, HR practices, they would be different when it comes to the between organizations, right? So within organizations, we can take an example within the organization. If we take the example that between the different departments, the policy can be different. For example, in the sales department, maybe the sales personnel is supposed to come even on Saturdays, but in some other in the finance department or in the accounting department, it may not be a requirement, right? And similarly, the the working hours, they might be different in the two departments. The holiday plan might be different in the two departments, and so on. Then we have the similarly we have the between organization differences. The policies of the organizations can differ between the organizations as well, and those policies, basically, they need to align the organization's corporate policy, all the policies at all levels, right? Then we have the what is the overall aim of the management, of the human resource management? That is to design the work systems that are around the firm's strategy, right? And that is the deployment of workers around technologies and production processes. So workers should be deployed around technologies and production processes in a way that make them function effectively, and that make the organization's corporate policy or corporate strategy realize. Okay, there are three critical goals that the human resource management has, especially in today's era of globalization. One is that of labor productivity and cost effectiveness. So your costs should be minimum and you should give maximum productivity. We did the concept of efficiency, that was giving your output at lower costs and with minimum wastes, right? Of course, it can be done through economies of scale. that is directly related to the firm size. The bigger the firms are, the more and more amount of output they're going to produce, and they can gain better economies of scale compared to the small firms who are going to produce in small scales, who have small scale production, and then it would be difficult for them to reap the benefits of economies of scale, and that is why they may not be as productive, right? But then here related to this, we need to understand that how the different practices in the organization can make the labor productive as well as cost effective. So for in some bigger firms, if we talk about the training and selection programs, they're spending really heavily on the training and selection programs because they expect that this training and selection program is really going to increase the productivity of the labor, right? That investment in training and development program, although it might be very expensive, but it would be cost effective. Why? Because it is going to ultimately reduce the per unit cost of the labor, of the output that you're producing. The unit cost of the output is going to decline because that the amount that you're investing in your employees is going to lead you to the higher productivity than the productivity that per unit productivity that they were giving earlier. So this kind of investments would be labor productive as well as they would be cost effective. So the management, it is upon the management of the firm to understand what kinds of practices do they need to adopt and what are the consequences of those practices for the organization, right? If on the other hand a small firm is doing the same, if it is investing heavily in its training and selection and that small firm is not very technology oriented, right, that is producing the standardized goods and mass production standardized goods where low skills of labor is required, and then if they are really making their selection procedure very modern, they are doing hiring in various phases, right, conducting structured interviews, tests, so which is all very expensive. If they are doing this kind of selection procedures which are really expensive, then they're also spending on their human resources in the form of their trainings and developments, but that is not actually required by that firm because of the nature of the product it is producing. It does not require that much skills from its labor. So then what's going to happen is that it's not going to be cost effective, and it may increase the productivity of the labor very little. So the firm needs to understand what are the what is the context of the firm and how it needs to operate in that context, what HR practices it needs to deploy. So in certain contexts maybe a walk-in interview is enough, but in certain other contexts you need to carry on hiring in different phases. You need to test your employee at different phases, and you need to conduct a structured interviews, a panel interview or a group discussion. Then the second critical human resource goal is the organizational flexibility, right? So I told you earlier also in my previous one of my previous lectures that how there is a requirement for the organizations to be flexible. They are increasingly required to be flexible because of the ups and downs taking place in the economy all over the world, right? There are recessions, and there are as a result of which the purchasing power of the people that is adversely hit, and because of the globalization, when the purchasing power of the people is hit in one part of the world, it is affecting the industry in another part of the world. So as a result of which the demand of your product may fall, and if you are not reducing your fixed costs, as a result what will happen is that you will be entering into losses. Your per unit cost will increase, right? Your profitability will fall and your sales will fall. So the organization needs to be really flexible in response to the changes that are taking place in the external market. So this flexibility by the organization can be achieved by two ways. One is through short-run agility, and the other one is the long-run agility. So short-run agility is basically adjusting the price of existing labor. So that is by way of functional flexibility, and that is by way of numerical flexibility. Functional flexibility is that you are trying to respond to the changes, to the demands for your product from the external market by the flexibility in your internal labor market. That is what you have already inside the labor market. The employees that you have, you are trying to rotate those employees. You're doing their job rotations, or you're taking them extra work, taking extra work from them, asking them to work some extra hours and pay them for those extra hours. Right? That is the concept of functional flexibility. Right, or you're just rotating their jobs and then responding to the market conditions, for example, the high demand of your product from the market by just rotating your labor internally. And the numerical flexibility is that you are hiring the contractual workers or the part-time workers and trying to meet the rise or the fall in the demand accordingly. So especially the organizations who are into the lines of business where the nature of business is really cyclical, right? They need to have this kind of flexibility. For example, if a firm is producing cardigans, right? So their demand really increases, and the demand for their product increases really in the winters, right? And then at that time they need to have more headcount. So it can what it can do is that it has the two options. One is the numerical flexibility, and the other one is the functional flexibility. Either it hires the part-time workers only during that period for a couple of 2-3 months, right, and meets its demand, or it meets its demand by ways of functional flexibility, taking overtime work from the existing employees. Then we have the long-term agility, which is meeting long-term targets such as change in the technology or market demands. That is the other critical human resource goal, that you need to meet the changes in the technology in the long run. So if the firm is trying to maintain its flexibility through short-run agility, it may not be possible for the firm to be agile in the long run. So long-run agility is basically being efficient in the long run. Short-run agility is focusing on your efficiency in the short run, but long-run agility can only be, so it is long-run agility is more linked to the long-term vision of the organization, right? Where how it wants to respond to the market changes or the environmental changes or the change in technology in the long run. It needs to be proactive for that. It needs to have that human resource base for that, to achieve the long-run agility. And then there is this tension between these two forms of agility. For example, whether you need to have a contractual employees, which we do when we want to gain them short-run agility by way of numerical flexibility, or you want to have a permanent staff base. So permanent staff base is, for example, required if you want to gain this long-run agility, because the permanent staff is more committed and loyal to the organization. They try to identify with the long-run goals of the organization, and they try to work strategically by owning the objectives of the organization and merging them into their own personal objectives. But the contractual staff, on the other hand, or the part-time workers, on the other hand, you cannot expect that kind of commitment from those workers, because they know that they are in the organization for another 2 or 3 months and then they'll leave the organization. So they are there to meet their own goals. They cannot identify with the organizational goals the way the permanent staff can, and that is the tension between the short-run agility and the long-run agility. Then we have another third critical HR goal, which is the social legitimacy. So what does social legitimacy refer to? It is the government regulations, or the protection of natural environment, occupational safety and health, equal employment opportunity, triple bottom line. Then we have incentives as best companies to work for, social accountability, 8,000 certified auditors or accredited audit agency, consult employees and unions for complaints and non-compliance of HR practices. So what all this refers to is that other than those two human resource management goals of enhancing the labor productivity and at the same time staying cost efficient, And the second HR goal of attaining the flexibility, both short run and the long run flexibility, and the tension between the two, we have another HR goal, which is social legitimacy. That is that how you have to behave as socially responsible towards the environment. Only fulfilling the organizational objectives is not enough, or that is not the only goal that fulfill the corporate strategic objective of the organization and align your policy in a way that you're meeting the corporate objectives of the organization. That is not enough. You need to also be legitimate towards your you have some certain responsibility towards your society. You have certain corporate social responsibility, right? So how you have to respond to the environment, how you have to protect that environment, and how you have to protect the other stakeholders which are involved, which are the general public, which are the customers, right, and which is the environment itself, right? How you have to what is the effect of your production, for example, on the are you producing pollution with your manufacturing facilities, through your manufacturing, where is your manufacturing plant located, what are your policies on account of occupational safety and health, is it a safe place to work for, what are your laws on equal employment opportunity. All these ideas, all these concepts, they are related to the social legitimacy, why an organization needs to be responsible towards the society. Let's have just have an overview on all the other human resource goals at a glance. Let's just have a very close glance, and then in our next few lectures we'll be discussing them in more detail. Here I'll just read them out for you. I'll just point them out for you. So the first one is the getting the best employees. Staffing, how you have to plan, how you have to staff your recruit, that make the recruiting, how you have to outsource, how you have to screen the different applicants, and how you have to select the new employees. Then we have the employees due benefits and compensation, which is that how you have to then you have how you have to train your employees, and the career development of the employees, right? Their leadership development, their management development, the personnel development, the supervisional development, etc. Then how you have to ensure that there is compliance by the employees of the regulations that you have within the organization. So the personnel policies and records, the employee laws, topics and issues, ethics, and other statutory requirements under the labor laws. That is also a part of our goal of the human resource, to meet those laws and to comply with those laws, to make sure that they are being complied with. Then ensuring safe work environments, the diversity management, dealing with drugs at the workplace, employee assistance programs, wellness programs, safety at the workplace, preventing violence, supporting spirituality, etc. These are all the goals of the human resource management. Sustaining high-performing employees, their performance management, their productivity, and the retention of the employees who are really performing well. There are a few tensions in human resource management as well, which can be termed as the strategic tensions. The first one is that labor scarcity. We know that especially in there has been a scarcity of the skilled labor. There has always been a scarcity of skilled labor. But if we take the example of healthcare and IT, there was really IT boom in the 1990s, and IT workforce was really scarce in that decade. And there has always been a shortage of healthcare staff. If we see that the turnover ratio of the nurses has been very high all over the world, it has been reported to be very high, and there is always been there is shortfall of the healthcare professionals. So what is the challenge here is that on the one hand, the skilled labor force, they are scarce, and on the other hand, the firms, they are in need of those skilled labor force. So here what happens is that when the labor market is really tight for those resources, the well-resourced firms, they're in a better position to recruit and select and hire those resources and to retain those resources than the small firms. The small firms, they always remain under pressure to to select, to recruit, and then to retain those resources, because the smaller firms, they have smaller pockets as well, and the bigger firms, they're giants, they have bigger pockets, they can easily sustain the cost of the skilled workforce. And then we have another tension in human resource management, which is the labor motivation. Why motivation is important? Why labor motivation is important? We are going to have very detailed discussion on this topic in our upcoming lectures. But of course, we know that employee motivation is a very important source of very important employee outcomes and the organizational outcomes, right? Including their satisfaction and including their turnover and including their performance, etc. So when an employee enters an organization, he enters into a psychological contract with the organization. So it is the part of the contract which is unwritten, right? So and this part deals with the expectations that an employee has from the organization, and also the expectations that the organization has from the employee, right? So this psychological contract, if at a later stage, is when the employee starts working with the organization, if he perceives that, okay, the organization or the employer made this and this promises with me at the time of the hiring or at the time of the interview, but they are not being met. The environment is not as conducive as I was told it is. The career or development opportunities are not as much as I was told they are, right? Or the working hours are much longer than I was told earlier, right? I do not have to sit till 5 o'clock, but I have to sit till 7 o'clock, right? So all these expectations, which when they are not met, they lead to employee demotivation, right? And employee demotivation can be really harmful. Employer, on the other hand, he always feels that he is in a better position to get things done from the employee, right? So what is the way out of this tension? There are different approaches how you can deal with this. One is the unit trust approach, which says that you need to, if the coordination between the employer and the employee is improved, you can get out of this trouble. Then we have the pluralist approach, which says that you need to improve the intrinsic and extrinsic incentives that are provided to the employee. So intrinsic incentives maybe provide him with better opportunities for work, give him more autonomy at his task, and give him a more conducive environment. And the extrinsic incentives can be in the form of the rewards, in the form of money, increase in the salary, promoting the employee, giving him an increment, etc. Right? So these are the two different approaches then on how you can the employer can deal with the labor motivation problems. So of course the conflicts, they can be detrimental to the worker and the worker motivation and the trust, and the consequences it has for the outcomes both at the individual and the organizational level. I already told you. Then we have the third strategic tension in human resource management, which is labor management. As we discussed earlier, that on one hand, because of the pressures from the organization toward pressures on the organization for organizational flexibility, it is increasingly hiring the workers who are on the short-term contract, and the promise of long-term employment and lifelong security is gone, right? So the workers, what the organization wants from the workers is that they should be dependable and disposable at the same time. So the organization wants that it can dispose them of anytime it wants, but it also wants to be dependable on them, and that is the strategic tension. Because when you are not offering lifetime employment or lifetime commitment to the employee, you cannot expect that level of commitment or loyalty towards the organization from the employee, as it is reciprocal. So there is emergence of this core periphery models to deal with this tension. Core periphery model basically gives an explanation of what is the core number, or what is the minimum number, or what is the number of the permanent staff that an organization should have, and what is the number of periphery staff or the temporary staff or the contractual staff that an organization need to have for its smooth functioning, right? And how you can achieve a clever balance between your short-term and long-term demands. That is between, you can deal with the challenge of short run and long run agility. We have two schools when it comes to the adoption of human resource practices, of strategic human resource practices. One is the best fit school and the other one is the best practices school. So let's first talk about the best fit school. In strategic human resource management, there is a fundamental debate over how HRM is and should be linked to wider business strategy. To many scholars, it seems obvious that strategic human resource management relies on a contingency position. Firms fit their human resource management to their particular strategies and environment and are wise to do so. This is what the best fit school says, that the firms, they try to relate their human resource practices to the corporate business practices, to the corporate strategy of the organization, and so they try to align their human resource strategy with their business strategy, and they are wise to do so. That is what the best fit school says. So HR strategy, it should be context specific and argue that situational factors inevitably affect choices in firms, including the environment, the industry, the government policies, work systems evolve accordingly. So as per this view, firms make the strategic decisions on their human resource management policies and practices based on the broader society, the strategy, the corporate strategy of the organization at large, the business strategy, the business objectives of the organization, as well as keeping in mind the situational factors or the context in which the organization is operating. That is what the environment in which it is operating, the industry in which it is operating, and the governmental policies that are affecting the organization or that are binding on the organization. So the work systems in the organizations, they evolve accordingly. Small SMEs, for example, they have the limited HR function, and the large companies or the corporates, they have the HR departments at the sophisticated levels, right? So we discussed this context and the situational factors, that how they are, your HR policies, they are different with the context and with the situational level. We discussed them with a few examples in our upcoming slides, and that is what the crux of this best fit school is. Here we see that there are a number of factors that are affecting the management choices in HR strategy. We have the economic and technological factors inside and outside the firm, and we have the social and political factors inside and outside the firm, right? So these all these factors are more or less similar to what we have done in the external and internal assessment, or mainly in the external assessment, such as a firm, what is the competitive strategy, what is the sector in which it is operating, what is the nature of the technology, dominant technology that it is using, what is the size, structure and stage of the firm in the industry life cycle, and what is the quality of business capital, how much business capital, how much is funded, how much is capitalized, that is how much it is taking from the banks, for example. Then general economic conditions prevalent. So these are the factors which are related to the economy and technological factors inside and outside the firm, and we have the social and political factors inside and outside the firm, such as the degree of labor scarcity, expectations and power of employees, including the union strategies where they exist, then managerial capabilities and politics, labor laws and social norms, what kind of laws and norms are prevalent, and general educational levels and vocational training systems. So we keeping in view all these different aspects from inside and outside the organization, it develops its management choices and its management strategy. So this is, as we saw in our previous slide, a firm is keeping all these things in mind, its environment, its industry and its government policies, and then is making the decisions of its human resource management, which is context specific and which is situational specific. So the best fit practices view says that a firm needs to make two kinds of fits. One is the internal fit, which is between the human resource practices that it utilizes, and the other one is external fit, which is matching human resource strategy to the competitive strategy of the business unit. So let's discuss them again in detail. Here I have taken a table or a chart for you, which was developed by Miles and Snow, and it tells the different competitive strategies that the different organizations adopt and how it has these different strategies of different organizations are related to the different human resource management practices by those organizations. How the choice of their human resource management practices differs, or it should differ as per their competitive strategies. So first we see that we have the defenders, right? Defenders are basically the firms whose competitive strategy is stable, limited and stable product line. They are not too much into product diversification, a few products and stable product line. So they want to grow through penetration. They want to grow with the same products, right? And then we have the emphasis on efficiency here, right? They want to produce at lowest possible costs and higher productivity. They want to specialize in those products through economies of scale, standardization of products and penetration. These are the defenders, right? Then we have the prospectors. Prospectors are those firms who want to grow through innovation, right? They want to grow through entering new markets, new market development. They have their focus on new market development, they have their focus on innovations, and they keep changing the product lines. What these are trying to do is that they have basically a proactive approach, which we can say, right? So they are really innovative firms, they are really creative firms, bringing new things into the market, trying to create the demands for their products from the customers. So this is the kind of the perspective that these firms have, the prospectors, right? And then we have the analyzers. They're a mixture of these two strategies, or these two kind of firms, stable and partly changing product lines. So they're basically, what they're doing is that they are trying to penetrate in the existing market, and they're also trying to introduce the new product lines into their already existing product line by following the strategy of the prospectors. So they're trying to adopt a mixed approach. That is their competitive strategy. So how we see that these three kinds of firms, they're adopting three different types of competitive or business strategies, right? And how their human resource strategy is going to differ, or it should differ with their competitive strategies, so that the human resource strategy and the business strategy are in line with each other, and then they will be supporting each other. If human resource strategy is not in line with the business strategy, then the performance is going to fall, or the labor productivity is going to fall. So the staffing and development strategies, for example, we see that here the emphasis is on internal training and development when it comes to the defenders, because defenders, they have their stable product lines, right? And they are growing through the penetration, so, and they want efficiency, so they're more concentrating on the standardization, more concentrating on the specialization of the labor. So what they're trying to do is that train and develop their workers and build their workers internally, so that they can increase efficiency that way. On the other hand, the prospectors, since they're really concentrating on the innovation, on creativity, right, and they're also changing their product lines, so they cannot have a good base of workers that are only internal, right? So in other words, we can say that they cannot have a very big number of permanent workers. What they can do is that they can outsource, right? Because of the changing needs of their product line, it is cost efficient for them to outsource, to buy from external, right? So they emphasize more on recruitment. Then we have the analyzers, who have the mixed approach, so both into stable product lines, and they're also partly changing their product lines. Therefore they use a combination of both, make and buy as needed. Then we have what are the implications of the performance appraisal. For the defenders, what they're trying to do is that their performance appraisals are more process oriented. They're more linked to the training need analysis. They're more linked to the inputs that the employees are giving. On the other hand, the prospectors, they are basically result oriented. So they want their performance appraisals are more linked to the results. They're not linked to the input, but they're linked to the output, what you're producing in the end, what output you're giving in the end, right? And the analyzers, they again use a process oriented approach, because they are most of it they are like defenders, right? Then we have the pay policies. What implications do these three kinds of competitive strategies they have for the pay policies that the firm is using? The defenders, they will more be using their focus would be more on internal equity, right? Because they have very stable line of business, and they are concentrating on developing of their human resource base, right? And who have a certain limited level of skill, right? And what they're doing they're trying to maintain thus the equality in the pays of their human resource development internally, right? So make their input output ratio comparison within the organization. But on the other hand, prospectors, since they are really innovative kinds of business firms and technology oriented kinds of business firms, and they demand very high skilled labor force for their activities, for their they select the people who are really proactive and who are really innovative and creative and very highly skillful. So what they do is that for their pay policies, they are more focused on the external competitiveness, right? Because if they will not focus on external competitiveness, their skilled workforce who is already in shortage, that might be poached by some competitor, right? So they need to offer their workers very competitive packages, very competitive salaries. Then we have the analyzers, who are concerned with both internal equity and external competitiveness, because they are using a mix of both in their competitive strategy. So their strategy vis-a-vis pay policy would also be the same, as we saw in earlier cases as well. In staffing, performance appraisal also, their strategy is more of a mixed. Okay. If we take the example of, we have a case example that of a research that was conducted on 200 Spanish firms, and it showed that the innovative firms, they follow employee participation, training and development opportunities, better wages, hiring of creative, innovative people, giving greater powers and discretion to employees, reduced control, extensive trainings, providing more resources for experimentation. So that was the study of a Spanish firms, which shows that as according to the competitive strategy of the organization, how their human resource strategy was aligned with their competitive strategy. So the innovative firms, they need highly expert people, they need highly expert employees, so they were really spending on all the HR policies which were leading to realization of their competitive strategy, which is innovation. So they were making sure that they are hiring the people who are innovative. They were spending on them, their training and development heavily in order to polish their skills of innovation. They were giving them the environment in which they can, their innovation skills or their creative capabilities or their creative thinking is not stifled. They were given discretion, they were given autonomy, and so on. They were given the chances on resources for experimentation, which are the requirements for innovation. Then we have the internal fit here, which is it can be the complementary fit, which is a single employee fit. Internal fit, basically, as I told you earlier, it refers to how the human resource management policies should be aligned with each other, as opposed to the external fit, where the human resource policies should be aligned to the business strategy of the firm. So complementary fit is a single employee fit, which says that if you're using one kind of human resource management service for the employee, then your all HRM policies for one employee should be supportive of each other, or they should complement each other, right? So for example, use of expensive selection processes should be accompanied by training programs and retention programs, right? If you're spending really heavily on the selection of an employee, and you're not spending on the trainings of the employee, or if you're spending on the training and development of an employee, but you're not you do not have such human resource management policies which are helpful in retaining the employee, then your investments would be gone, right? So the HRM policies, they should complement each other. Then we have the consistency fit, which is fit between the employees, especially fit between the employees who are at the same occupational level. If you have one kind of policies for one employee in the same occupational group, such as clerks, you should also have similar human resource management policies for other employees performing the similar tasks. Then we also have the temporal fit, which is that if you're providing one kind of human resource management practices or services to the employee, or you have one kind of policies for the human resource for the employee at one time, you should have them the next year or after some time as well. It's not that today you are providing one service to the employee and you are reversing that service or that practice or that policy for the employee after 6 months or so, because that is going to be demotivating for the employee. It would be like you are withdrawing your policies, or there is no consistency with your policy with respect to time. So when it comes to the internal fit, what we need to take care of is that there should not be costly duplication of the practices, such as structured interview or assessment center taking 5 to 6 stars, or over-designed selection systems where extra hurdles are no value. Right? So there should be complementary between the human resource management practices, but we should also be careful that it is not the duplication of the practices, which can be really costly. You need to be really careful that, for example, that if you're doing the structured interviews, what kind of assessment center tests do you need? What is the requirement of the job? And as per that, you should do your assessments, right? How much assessments, what level of assessment do you need? You need to think it strategically, and you need to design your systems accordingly. There should not be duplication, because that can be costly. And then you should also avoid dead combinations. For example, if you're training very heavily on the teamwork of the employees, but you're rewarding them individually, if there is the work processes are revolving around the teamwork, right, then and you're providing them the trainings on the teamwork, on the concept of the teamwork, right, but you're rewarding them individually, then it's not going to be very helpful for the team effort, right, and can be demotivating for the team and for the members of the team, right? So the practices, they should be complement each other, they should not be in contradiction to each other. Then we have the external we have some criticism on the external fit. First one is that the multiple fits are needed, that is plural HR objectives. As we saw that theory of best fit, it talks about the external fit and it talks about the internal fit. It talks about the fit between the strategy of the organization and between the human resource management policies and practices, or HR strategy. But the theory does not, or the view does not anywhere talk about the employee, the requirements of the employee, or the needs of the employee, or the fit between HR strategy or the organizational strategy and the employee needs. Employees are totally ignored, right? So for example, what would be the working hours? In order to meet the organizational strategy, you develop a human resource strategy, right, and there is an alignment between those strategies. But what are the implications of those strategies for the employees, for their employee well-being, for the employee needs? Are they being fulfilled or not? What are the implications for the employees in terms of their working hours, right? What are their legitimacy needs? What are their social needs? Are they protected or not? What are their minimum wages, right? What are their safety laws? It does not talk upon how the HR strategy should also be linked with the employee needs. It talks about fits, but it does not talk about the fit with the employee needs. That is one of the criticism on this view. And the other one is that a specific HR strategy, it cannot be applied to all Lambda firms. I gave you an example earlier, the table that I showed you about the defenders, about the analyzers, and about the prospectors, which was showing that how the different firms, they have different competitive strategies, and how they have distinct HR strategy which is aligning with their competitive strategies. But there are also a few firms who are all-rounders, that is, they have a mix of the two strategies, right, and they cannot adopt one single HR strategy, right? So what about those firms? Because it says that a firm needs to have one kind of strategy which is aligned with the competitive strategy. But the firms who have multiple competitive strategies, of course, they also will be having multiple human resource strategies. And for the internal fit, of course, we just discussed the three kinds of internal fits that this view talks about: the complementary fit, the consistency fit, and the temporal fit. But it's not practically possible in an organization to have these kinds of fits because of a number of reasons and a number of context-specific situations, right? So to 2 to 3 different clerks, maybe you cannot have similar human resource management practices because of a number of reasons, and it may not be advisable to have similar consistent HR practices for similar occupational group because of a number. Maybe their needs are different, right? Maybe one is more interested in the intrinsic rewards, the other one is more interested in the extrinsic rewards, right? And maybe one is not. Similarly, we also have the different flexibility pressures for the organizations that we talked about in our fit, which can lead to the layoffs of the employees, and we don't have that kind of job security promises for the employees. So how can we talk about the temporal fit in that case? These are very practically, that is what is happening as a challenge. It is a challenge for the even very big corporations and very big companies around the globe. The companies such as Philips, they have done recently very, very massive layoffs, right? And they cannot offer the employees the commitment that they used to offer earlier, as we discussed before. So in that kind of situations, what about the temporal fit for the employees? What about the consistency fit for the employees that this view talks about? We also have an example of 2 firms who have similar cost. Previously, the example about the defenders and the analyzers and the prospectors was they had different competitive strategies. Now we have another example which is very interesting. It is about the 2 firms who have same competitive strategy, that is, they are both cost leadership firms, but they have different technology. Right? They have different productive technology. One firm is high technology firm, so its labor capital ratio is low, and the other firm is the labor oriented firm, right? So it is very labor intensive firm, right? So the firm who is very capital intensive and it is employing high amounts of technology and very less amount of labor, and it is still its strategy is still cost leadership. What are the implications of HR strategy for this firm? This firm would be needing really highly skilled labor force who can operate the high technology oriented machinery of the firm, right? So it will be needing to invest very heavily in the selection, in the training and development of the employees, and in the retention of the employees, in the compensation of the employees to be successful, because it is highly technology oriented. It needs a very highly skilled labor force, right? And if you will not employ those high skilled people, which are really expensive, it won't be cost effective, because low skilled people will misuse the technology. Which will lead to low productivity, low labor efficiency, and that will lead to an expense for the firm in terms of they may even destroy or disrupt the processes, then they may even destroy the machinery and the technology that has been used by the organization, and that may prove to be very costly for the organization. So that firm can stay, technology oriented firm can stay cost leader only if it is spending heavily on a combination of these human resource practices. On the other hand, it is the opposite case for the firm who has a competitive strategy of being cost leader, and the firm who is spending, who is very labor intensive. So this kind of firms may not need very much skilled labor force to perform its operations, and it does not need to spend very heavily on its selection and the training and development of its employees, because they can perform the tasks even without those HR practices. If that firm is also adopting the same HR strategy as the other technology-oriented firm, which is also low-cost firm, if that firm is adopting the same strategy as the other firm, then it's going to be very costly for this firm, right? Because the spending so much on their skills, on the development of their skills, on their training is not necessary here. That is not required here. So what are the implications for the managers? They really need to understand the context, and they really need to understand the structure of the firm, the context of the firm, the line of business it is in, the competitive strategy of the firm, as well as the production technology that it is utilizing. So keeping in mind all these elements, the firm needs to choose its policies, it needs to devise its policies, and it needs to implement its policies and practices. And its policies and practices, they should be aligned with each other. They should be complementary to each other. They should not be deadly combinations. We were just discussing the critic to the internal fit, and we saw that in the previous example that the two firms we talked about, they have the same competitive strategy, but they have different human resource management strategy. So the critic here basically is that best fit view only says that you need to have a fit between your HR strategy and your competitive strategy. But here, these two firms who have same competitive strategy, but they have different production technologies, even then their HR strategy is different. But this view, the best fit view, is overly thin, and it does not take into consideration such complexities. Then we have how the HR practices, they are linked to the competitive strategy. This is the model that we have already discussed, and now it is presented here in figure form, that we have the desired competitive strategy, which is leading to the required employee skills and behaviors. So your competitive strategy decides that what kind of skills and behaviors you require from the employer, what kind of workforce do you need to meet your competitive strategy. And so you hire that kind of people who can meet your competitive strategy, and you develop your human resource policies which are supportive of that competitive strategy, and then you achieve your desired human resource outcomes. We have the best practices school of thought, which is the other school of thought for the development of the strategic human resource management policies and practices. So as per this school of thought, context of the firm is not that meaningful. There are a certain set of human resource management practices which, when applied or which when utilized or which when implemented by the firm, will give it competitive advantage wherever that firm is, right? So it will, in whichever part of the world it is, in whichever line of business it is operating, in whichever context it is operating, if a firm adopts a certain set of HR practices, it is going to succeed. This is what this view says. As the name indicates, the best practice means that there is a set of best human resource practices which, if adopted, they will give the firm positive outcomes. So how it happens? Because the view says that when you are adopting a certain set of human resource practices, for example, when the view says that, of course, the structured interviews, they are better than unstructured interviews, right? Training and development, of course, training and development can lead to positive outcomes. Then if you don't have those training and development procedures, if you have certain selection procedures, you have certain tests, you will have positive outcomes compared to when you don't have those selection tests, right? And then we have the other examples. If you have performance, which is pay, which is related to the performance, that will have positive outcomes, because then there will be better perceptions of equity among the employees. Right, there is promotion from within, there are higher wages, there is more empowerment, there is more concept of job redesign, there is more concept of employee autonomy, employee participation. So there is a long list of HR practices which according to this view, are of course better if they are adopted by the firm, and they give a firm advantage and they give a firm positive outcomes. How it happens? Because when you're adopting these set of HR practices, such as you're providing training and selection to the employees, you're promoting them from within, etc., it is going to enhance their abilities. Right? It is going to enhance their abilities, and as a result of which it is going to enhance their abilities, it is going to enhance their motivation, and it is going to give them more opportunity to perform. As the first line of the slide, you can see that it enhances employee ability through AMO. AMO is ability, motivation, and opportunity to perform. AMO is a very famous theory, performance, which says that performance is a function of ability, motivation, and opportunity to perform. So as per this school of thought, if you are introducing these sets of HR practices, such as selective hiring, then training the employees, promoting them from within, providing them the environment where they have more autonomy, where there is lesser inequity, where they have higher wages, it is going to enhance their ability to perform, it is going to give them more motivation to perform, and it is going to give them more opportunity to perform, as a result of which their performance is going to improve. So wherever you are, whichever part of world you are, whichever business you are going to succeed if you adopt these sets of HR practices. But this view has also been under criticism. Why is it under criticism? Because one, there is no uniform set of HR practices which has been agreed upon by the different authors of this view. Or by the different researchers. Some of them say that there are 4 or 5 sets of basic HR practices which, if adopted, they are the best practices. Some say that there is 15 to 16 or even 18 sets of HR practices which, if adopted, are the best practices that need to be adopted to achieve positive outcomes. So how much, which practices, and in what number? There is no agreed upon conclusion as to this. Then what if a practice is good for corporate goals but not for employees, such as layoff? Is that still a best practice? So again, it does not consider what does it mean by the best practice. Is it best practice only for the firm? That if a practice is, for example, if a practice of layoff, if a firm wants to achieve flexibility and it undertakes its HR practice of laying off employees, as a result of which it improves its own profitability because its fixed term costs have not reduced. So is it a best practice? Is it only in terms of the organizational outcomes that we are talking about, or it is also about the employees? Is it also about the well-being of the employees? Is it best practice for the employee as well, or it is only best practice for the corporate? It means that we are talking only in terms of the organization and the best practice for the organization. Then, of course, every organization, at any part of the world, it is subject to certain laws by the government. It is certain cultural laws which are really country specific, right? Just as we said, there are political factors, there are socio-economic factors, there are environmental factors, and there are a number of other factors which are affecting the organization and which are affecting every organization differently according to its context. So we cannot ignore the context altogether, and that is what this view is basically doing. It is totally ignoring the context. So how can best practices be universalistic, which this view says? Because there are different policies in different countries. For example, if we know that in Japan there is the policy of, but as per the government law, you cannot dispose of the employee, or you cannot lay off the employee once you have hired an employee. There is a concept of long-term or lifetime employment, right? But in Pakistan there is no such law, right? Hirings are increasingly on contractual basis. So how can two firms operating in Pakistan and operating in Japan utilize the same HR practice, and how can it be best for the two countries? Because the laws are different in the two countries. How can they apply the uniform policies and practices? Then there are a number of other factors, such as the organizational structure, the size of the firm, adoption of new technology, etc., which play an important part, and they cannot guide on the best on what are the best practices of the organization, right? So best practices, they are more relevant for sectors which emphasize quality, high technology, where firms need motivated and skilled employees and pay them higher in return. Even in high technology sectors, low skilled workers don't benefit as they are paid less, and best practices are not for them, right? So like we talked about in our previous slides, that high wages, that is a best practice, but it may not be best practice, because then it means that that practice is not for low skilled labor, because they are not paid high wages. Then we have the employers who will only invest in employees when they'll be sure of returns to stay cost effective, right? So this is a point which is linked to the previous point. This was the criticism that we have on the best practice school of thought, right? So with this, we have made a discussion today in today's lecture on strategic human resource management. What are the critical goals of strategic human resource management? What are the different challenges that is faced by human resource management? What are the different policies and practices that management can make, or that it makes, as and how these policies and practices are guided by the comparative strategy of the organization, and what are the different schools of thought, what is the underlying principles of those schools of thoughts, what is their philosophy as to how the firms can develop their strategic human resource management policies and practices to achieve better results. So we had a discussion on the philosophies of the two schools of thoughts. One was the best fit and the other one was the best practice. Best fit is really emphasizing on the context, on the structure of the organization, on the context of the organization, on its competitive strategy, and making your HR policies and practices accordingly. And the best practice school is totally ignoring the context and the structure of the organization and the laws in which the organization is operating, and it says that there is a set of practices which it needs to adopt to be successful wherever it is. But one size does not fit all. With this, we come to the end of our today's presentation. I hope you had an informative session again today. So I'm thankful to you for your patient hearing. See you again. Allah Hafiz.